45,000 kilometers. That is how much high-speed rail China has built since 2008. America has 735 kilometers. China built its network in 15 years. America spent $22 billion in that same window and produced 0 kilometers of revenue service. Not slow progress. 0. The money went to California. The train did not come. That gap, 45,000 kilometers versus nothing, and $22 billion versus nothing, is the subject of this video. China did not build more because it had better engineers or more money. It built more because the decision to build was made at a level of government that could actually carry it through. This is the channel that follows what infrastructure actually produces. Subscribe and tell us in the comments, do you think America will ever have a real high-speed rail network? In 1964, Japan opened the Tokaido Shinkansen between Tokyo and Osaka. It ran at 210 kilometers per hour. It worked. It made money. It demonstrated that high-speed rail was not a European experiment, but a commercially viable infrastructure technology that could be built and operated profitably. Every major industrialized nation watched the Shinkansen open and reached a conclusion about what to do next. France built the TGV, Germany built the ICE, South Korea built the KTX. China, which in 1964 had no significant railway engineering capacity of its own, spent the following 4 decades importing technology, licensing designs, and building the domestic engineering base that would eventually make it the world's largest high-speed rail operator. The United States watched the Shinkansen open and built more highways. That decision, made not in a single moment but across 2 decades of federal transportation budgets that consistently prioritize road capacity over rail, is the original sin of American rail infrastructure. Not the terrain, not the distances, not the lack of population density. The allocation of capital to a competing system for long enough that the rail ecosystem, the engineering firms, the component manufacturers, the political constituencies, the operating knowledge, cease to exist as a functioning domestic industry. The terrain argument deserves to be addressed directly because it is the one most frequently deployed to explain why America does not have high-speed rail. The United States is a large country. The distances between its major cities are greater than the distances between European capitals. This is true. It is also true that China's territory is approximately the same size as the continental United States. The distance from Beijing to Shanghai is 1,400 kilometers. The distance from New York to Chicago is 1,200 kilometers. The distance from Los Angeles to San Francisco is 600 kilometers. China built a high-speed rail line connecting all 3 of those equivalent corridor pairs. The terrain argument does not survive contact with a map. By the time California voters approved the high-speed rail ballot measure in 2008, the United States had no domestic high-speed rail construction industry. There were no American firms with experience building dedicated high-speed track. There were no domestic suppliers for the specialized concrete ties, the catenary systems, the switch technology, or the rolling stock. Every major component of the proposed California system would need to be sourced from European or Asian manufacturers who had built their supply chains around the assumption that America would remain a customer, not a competitor. Here is what $22 billion has produced in California as of the time of this video. 278 kilometers of track bed in the Central Valley. Not track bed. The earthworks and some structural elements exist for a segment between Bakersfield and Merced. Those 2 cities together account for a combined metropolitan population of approximately 600,000 people, and they represent the lowest demand corridor in the entire planned route. The segment between Los Angeles and the Bay Area, the one that would actually generate ridership and revenue, has not begun construction. The environmental review for portions of that segment is still in progress. There are active lawsuits in 5 counties along the proposed alignment. Several municipalities have passed resolutions opposing the routing. None of this was unforeseeable in 2008. All of it was predicted in the independent peer review reports submitted to the California High-Speed Rail Authority during the planning phase and subsequently set aside. China did not avoid these problems because it had better engineers. It avoided them because the decision to build high-speed rail was made at the level of the State Council in 2004 and implemented through the Ministry of Railways with centralized land acquisition authority, a dedicated construction financing mechanism, and a technology transfer strategy that did not require domestic political consensus at the municipal level. Three numbers define what followed from that 2004 decision. In 2008, China opened its first dedicated high-speed line between Beijing and Tianjin, 117 kilometers, operating at 350 kilometers per hour. By 2015, the network had reached 20,000 kilometers. By 2023, the network reached 45,000 kilometers, connecting every provincial capital and most cities above 500,000 people. The construction cost averaged $17 to $21 million per kilometer, depending on terrain. California's projected cost runs approximately $150 million per kilometer on the segments where construction has begun. The cost gap has three primary sources, and only one of them is labor. The first is right-of-way acquisition. High-speed rail requires straight alignments. Curves above a certain radius reduce maximum operating speed and defeat the purpose of the technology. Straight alignments in a developed country with privately held land mean acquiring property from hundreds of individual owners, each of whom has legal standing to contest the valuation in court. California's right-of-way acquisition process has involved more than 3,000 individual property transactions. Each one required independent appraisal, offer, negotiation, and in many cases, litigation. In China, land reallocation for the rail corridors was handled through the same state ownership mechanism that governs highway construction. The alignment was set. The occupants were compensated by administrative determination, not market negotiation. The track went where the engineering said it should go. The second is the contracting model. California's high-speed rail project has been managed through a series of design-build contracts issued to private consortia under competitive procurement rules. The project management layer between the California High-Speed Rail Authority and the actual construction work involves multiple tiers of contractors, subcontractors, and consultants, each carrying overhead and profit margin. The organizational chart of the project's management structure is 23 pages long. China's high-speed rail construction was executed primarily through the state-owned China Railway Construction Corporation and China Railway Engineering Corporation, vertically integrated firms that own the equipment, employ the workers, and manage the concrete supply without a contracting layer between the decision and the execution. The third source is the absence of a national rail technology ecosystem. Because the United States has no domestic high-speed rail industry, California cannot source components competitively from multiple domestic suppliers. It is dependent on foreign manufacturers for the most expensive elements of the system. That dependency has a cost, both in procurement prices that reflect the absence of domestic competition and in the logistics of integrating components designed for different national standards. Here is the dimension of the American rail failure that receives almost no coverage. What it would have cost to build the network in 1975 versus what it will cost to build it now. In 1975, Amtrak was 5 years old. The Northeast Corridor existed. The engineering knowledge was present. The domestic steel and concrete industries were fully operational. A network of dedicated high-speed corridors connecting the 15 largest American metropolitan areas, built at the construction costs and interest rates of 1975, would have cost an estimated $40 to $60 billion in current dollars. The same network, built today with current right-of-way costs, current regulatory requirements, current procurement rules, and current financing costs, is estimated at between $2 and $3 trillion. The decision not to build in 1975 did not save America the cost of the network. It deferred that cost while it compounded for 50 years. Every decade of delay added approximately $300 billion to the eventual price tag in the form of rising land values, rising regulatory compliance costs, and the complete destruction of the domestic supply chain that would have made construction competitive. Three things look different now than they did at the beginning of this video. The first, California's $22 billion is not a construction failure. It is a planning failure that became a construction failure. The 2008 ballot measure was approved by voters before the routing was determined, before the environmental review was complete, and before anyone had established whether the projected ridership figures were achievable given the actual alignment being proposed. The money was committed to a concept. The concept turned out to require choices that were not included in what voters approved. When those choices became visible, the political consensus that had approved the concept dissolved, leaving a project with committed funding, no completed environmental review, no cleared right-of-way, and no domestic supply chain to build it. The second, China's 45,000-kilometer network did not get built because China had a better technology. It got built because China made the decision to build it at a level of government that could actually carry it through. American federalism distributes infrastructure decision-making across a system that requires consensus at the federal, state, regional, and local levels simultaneously. That system is designed to prevent any single authority from imposing infrastructure on unwilling communities. It performs that function with extraordinary reliability. It also performs it on projects that the communities involved actually want, and cannot distinguish between opposition that reflects genuine community harm and opposition that reflects the preference of a small number of property owners for a different routing that would affect their view. The third, by 2030, China's high-speed rail network is projected to reach 50,000 kilometers. It will connect to rail networks in Southeast Asia through corridors already under construction in Laos and Malaysia. The California system, if it is completed on its current timeline, will open its first revenue segment in 2033, covering the Central Valley. Los Angeles to San Francisco, the route voters approved in 2008, does not have a current completion date. The engineers who designed the Beijing-Tianjin line in 2006 had already retired before the 40,000th kilometer of Chinese high-speed rail opened. They were not at the ceremony. They were already working on the international corridors. The train that doesn't exist yet is still not finished.